What is left? What is left?
Open.
The man accidentally unearthed a world-class pink diamond, a stone whose size and color were enough to shake the world. Given his status as a slave, Solomon desperately wanted to keep the diamond for himself. But recently, a co-worker who had hidden a tiny diamond the size of a grain of rice in his mouth was discovered and executed on the spot. Where should he hide such a large diamond? At that moment, Solomon's heart began to beat faster. Just then, a loud explosion rang out. The nearby water pump had burst. The explosion drew everyone's attention. Solomon quickly seized the opportunity, crouched down slightly, and hid the diamond between his toes. Then, he used the excuse of needing the bathroom to leave quickly. Unexpectedly, the rebel commander noticed Solomon's suspicious behavior and immediately blocked his path. Fortunately, the diamond was hidden under the sole of his foot. Even after being searched everywhere, nothing unusual was found. However, when Solomon reached a secluded spot to hide the diamond, the cold muzzle of a gun was pressed against his head. It turned out the commander had not given up and had followed him stealthily. Just as Solomon was about to hand over the diamond, fate smiled upon him once more. Government forces launched a surprise attack, and a bomb fell right next to both of them. The rebel commander was seriously injured on the spot, while Solomon took the chance to run. Afterwards, Solomon went to a dry tree and buried the diamond there. Immediately after, he was captured by government forces. But upon arriving at the prison, Solomon found himself face to face with that same rebel commander. It turned out he wasn't dead, only injured in one eye. Despite that, he recognized Solomon instantly and roared in front of everyone. "This brat has a pink diamond of incalculable value. Whoever finds it will receive a great reward from me." Everyone began to look at Solomon with greedy eyes. To protect himself, he vehemently denied it, even stripping off all his clothes to prove his innocence. Although this method might have calmed those of lower rank, it could not fool Dany. Dany was a white man, born and raised in Africa, an unscrupulous black market diamond smuggler. Wherever there were diamonds, he was there. However, this was a dangerous profession. One small slip, and you could lose your life. But with his vast experience, Dany had perfected his cunning. He could not only recognize and prevent thefts, but also successfully move contraband goods. That day, Dany had easily obtained another batch of diamonds. To transport these diamonds to a neighboring country and sell them, he disguised himself as a magazine reporter and hired local shepherds as cover. The diamonds were sewn under the skin of one of the sheep. But what he didn't expect was that someone like him, who had never failed, would stumble this time. Seeing that he was about to be caught, Dany had no choice but to call his boss, Kutsi. As the head of Africa's largest mercenary army, Kutsi was famous throughout the region. But the opposition not only showed him no respect, but threw Dany directly into prison. Because of this, Dany was lucky enough to learn that Solomon possessed a rare pink diamond. Therefore, after being rescued by his accomplice, he immediately reported this news and instructed that Solomon be broken out at all costs. Due to his many years of experience in the diamond trade, Dany understood the value of that pink diamond much better than Solomon. Once he had it, he could not only achieve financial freedom, but also escape Kutsi's control and leave Africa forever. After giving his instructions, Dany returned to the hotel. As soon as he walked through the door, he used a dagger to extract one of his teeth. Hidden inside was a diamond. Clearly, he would only take it out as a last resort. When Dany went out to exchange money, a man snuck into his room. At the same time, his accomplices had also bailed Solomon out of jail and gave him some money before he left to prevent him from being re-imprisoned for vagrancy. Solomon was completely bewildered and didn't give it much thought because at that moment, he was focused solely on finding his family. It turned out that, before, Solomon was just an ordinary fisherman raising 3 children with his beloved wife. Although life was simple, it was not peaceful. His son, Dia, was particularly well-behaved, understanding, and eager to learn. Every day, he woke up punctually and walked 5 kilometers along mountain paths to get to school. But that day, when Solomon was picking up his son from school, they suddenly encountered a group of armed rebels. These men were cruel, bloodthirsty, and inhuman. As soon as they entered the village, they began firing indiscriminately at civilians, including many children. When killing, they didn't even blink. In the chaos, Solomon helped his wife and children escape successfully, but he was captured on the spot. Initially, They were going to cut off his arm, but the enemy saw he was strong and robust and felt it was a waste. So they tied him up and sent him to the diamond mines for forced labor. Then followed the scene from the beginning of the story. Elsewhere, after changing his money, Dany went to a bar. But his purpose was not to have fun, but to find the owner to order a pistol. Just then, Mattie's beauty caught his attention. Initially, Dany only intended to find a girl to sleep with, but after some conversation, he discovered she was a reporter, and she even immediately guessed he was a diamond smuggler. Dany hated getting involved with the press, but Mattie stuck to him, demanding he provide information to expose the blood diamond trade and the major smuggler behind it. However, as much as Dany liked beautiful women, he would not reveal any information to a stranger reporter. Upon returning to the hotel and seeing the ransacked room, Dany realized immediately that his accomplice had secretly reported the news about the pink diamond to Colonel Cutsy. Although he understood that in this land of cannibals, trust was the cheapest commodity, he could not contain his anger. The guy who broke into his room after finding nothing also showed up immediately. The two were on the same side, talking normally on the surface, but with different thoughts in their hearts. Dany decided to go back to see the colonel to lay it all out and strike the man hard in the face to vent his rage. Shortly after, Dany was invited to the colonel's mansion for tea. As Africa's greatest mercenary leader, the colonel both traded diamonds and helped the government suppress the rebels. You could say he made a fortune from the war. How could a man who only cared about money and despised others let a rare pink diamond pass by? So he gave a firm order demanding that Dany get that diamond for him. If he succeeded, all his previous business debts would be cleared. At the same time, he was also very aware of Dany's ambition, knowing he wanted to escape Africa. So he picked up a handful of red earth from the ground and said, "This is your home. You can never leave Africa." Dany, who had followed the colonel since he was a child, understood his methods and brutality, so he could only restrain his aggression and focus on dealing with Solomon. But by now, Solomon trusted no one. He insisted he had never seen any large pink diamond. Reluctantly, Dany had to resort to distraction tactics. At night, he returned to the bar. The owner handed him the pistol he had ordered and gave him some news. The rebels would attack the place tomorrow. He kindly advised him to leave early to save his life. Just then, Dany saw Mattie again. Unexpectedly, after having parted on bad terms last time, this time they clung to each other like lovers who had just been separated. Only one desired the flesh, while the other only wanted to gather information about the smuggling. However, even in that extremely ambiguous atmosphere, neither of them took the other's bait. Losing patience, Mattie immediately went on the direct attack, saying she had met too many people like him, who didn't care about human life for money. Dany also lost interest. But when he went to the bar for a drink, Mattie refused to let him go and followed him. This time, Dany didn't hold back either and shot back, "Do you think you are so noble? Do you think you can change Africa? In fact, you are also part of the blood diamond trade. If it weren't for American girls like you who always dream of a fairy tale wedding and a shiny stone, then these diamonds wouldn't be so valuable, and no one would go to such lengths to smuggle them." But Mattie countered that not all American girls want a fairy tale wedding, just as not all Africans live by massacring each other. In fact, every day there are people doing good things, but it's clear none of them are done by you. So the two parted on bad terms again. The next day, the rebels indeed advanced toward the city. The place was about to be plunged into a sea of war. Dany seized the opportunity to look for Solomon, hoping to persuade him to cooperate. At that moment, the pink diamond was a deadly liability. Solomon had absolutely no channel to sell it, but he remained focused solely on finding his family. Seeing this, Dany said immediately, "Without me, you have even less chance of changing your fate, of finding your wife and children." Just as the two were arguing fiercely, the rebels launched a large-scale attack. Amidst the chaotic flight, Dany continued to persuade him, and a trembling Solomon could only agree to cooperate. By then, government forces had clashed with the rebels. They had no respect for civilian lives. Fortunately, Dany was an experienced mercenary. He led Solomon through the rain of bullets, escaping to a relatively safe ruin. At night, the two used the cover of darkness to reach the city's only exit, but 3 rebel soldiers were guarding it. To escape, they had to take a risk. So, Dany told Solomon to pretend to be a rebel soldier while he pretended to be a captured prisoner. Waiting until the enemy lowered their guard, Dany immediately pulled his gun and killed the guards. He took the rebel's sniper rifle and shot the fugitive in the distance. This scene made Solomon realize his cruelty. Afterward, the two blended in with a group of refugees and arrived at a government-run camp. There, Dany met a reporter and through him found Mattie. As soon as they saw each other, Dany said, "I can give you information, but in exchange, you have to use your credentials to access the UN database to help Solomon find his family." Dany did this because he knew that to get the pink diamond, he first had to manage Solomon, and the only way was to try to help him find his family. Although Mattie knew she was being used, and also knew Solomon was definitely connected to the diamond, because a petty man who only cared about profit couldn't be generous enough to help a black fisherman. As a righteous reporter, as long as it was to save people, she didn't care about other things. Very soon, Mattie found the whereabouts of Solomon's family. They were in a refugee camp in the neighboring country of Guinea. But when they arrived by helicopter, they discovered the number of refugees there exceeded 1 million. Finding family members was not easy at all. Fortunately, God still had mercy on this pitiful man. Solomon quickly spotted the figures of his wife and daughter. However, his son Dia had been taken by the rebels. This completely devastated Solomon because he had witnessed with his own eyes the cruelty of children trained as soldiers and knew the rebels would surely turn Dia into one of them. And his prediction came true. At that moment, Dia had been trained by the one-eyed commander to be a killing machine. When massacring villagers, the boy showed no emotion and always ran to the front. To make matters worse, because the government feared that refugees would join the rebels, they announced that Solomon's wife and children would only be released to go home when the war ended. Empty-handed, Solomon was like a man without a soul. Every day he mechanically murmured his son's name. As for Dany, clearly he only cared about the diamond. After learning where Solomon had buried the stone, he concentrated all his energy on how to dig it up. But the terrain there was complex, with many factions fighting for control. The only chance was to infiltrate Mattie's team. But at that moment, Mattie was very troubled. A graduate of a prestigious school, she was smart and cunning, and could have lived a life of luxury in New York. But she had a strong savior complex, always wanting to eliminate injustice in the world. However, no matter how moving her articles or real her photos were, at most, they only managed to draw a few tears from readers, being fundamentally unable to change the suffering in Africa. She didn't want to continue like this. She wanted to use concrete evidence to topple those behind the blood diamond trade. Perhaps moved by Mattie's actions. Or perhaps just wanting the diamond, Dany told her the whole truth about the supply chain. He smuggled diamonds to neighboring countries. Then, local buyers delivered the diamonds to intermediaries. When these people bribed customs, they could certify that the diamonds had been mined domestically, allowing for legal export. The man behind this chain of interests was Vandy Kaap. On one hand, he hoarded large quantities of diamonds to control supply and keep prices high. On the other hand, he did everything possible to maintain the war, preventing the rebels' diamonds from flowing directly into the market. Upon finishing, Dany promised to provide direct evidence, but he had to wait to get the pink diamond for this information to go public. Otherwise, he would die without a proper burial. So, both reached a cooperation agreement. Dany and Solomon pretended to be staff and infiltrated Mattie's team. But on the way to their destination, the convoy was suddenly attacked by rebels. Amidst the crisis, the kind-hearted Solomon saved a child. As the bus had no more room, the few remaining could only get into another small truck. Unexpectedly, disaster brought fortune. Everyone on the bus was wiped out by the rebels, while they took the opportunity to escape through the jungle. But just as they escaped danger, they ran into local guerrillas. Fortunately, these people didn't have the habit of killing indiscriminately. After some gestures and Mattie's photograph, they not only quickly lowered their guard, but took the three of them to a hidden mansion for refuge. Compared to war-torn Africa, this place was an earthly paradise. The children here were all former captured child soldiers, but under careful teaching and love, they had regained their innate innocence. All this was thanks to the mansion's owner. He believed there is no real distinction between good and evil in people, that even the most atrocious villain, in a moment of goodwill, can make life more meaningful. Dany listened to these words and reflected. At night, he heard the children singing and, under the influence of palm wine, for the first time opened his heart to Mattie. It turned out Dany was a white man, born in Africa. At age 9, his mother was murdered and his father decapitated. War had taken everything from him. That's why, at 19, he followed the colonel to be a mercenary, fighting black people ever since. But then he realized none of it was for peace or erasing racial hatred, but only for money and profits. Since then, he decided to fight alone, becoming an egoistic smuggler. But now, he just wanted to live a quiet life, and that pink diamond was his ticket out of Africa. Seeing the expression of pain on Dany's face, Mattie unconsciously took his hand. Their hearts grew closer from that moment on. The next day, the owner of the mansion guided them toward their destination, but on the way, they encountered the rebels' child army. In his kindness, the owner thought he could persuade them with words, but unexpectedly, the opposition was hardened and numb, responding directly with gunfire. Dany quickly pulled his gun to threaten them. Taking advantage of the children being startled, he stepped on the gas and fled. Just then, the colonel's camp was nearby. To save the mansion owner, who was seriously wounded, Dany had no choice but to detour to the camp first. The good news was that the man still had a chance to survive, and Mattie could retreat with the refugees. The bad news was that at that moment, the colonel was preparing to personally lead his troops toward Kono, where they were headed, and demanded that Dany go with him to find the pink diamond. But Dany knew well that if he followed the large army, he probably wouldn't get a speck of diamond dust in the end. So, after leaving the tent, he immediately asked Mattie for help to lure away the guards near the armory so he could steal weapons and take Solomon himself. Hearing this, Mattie understood Dany's intention and knew this trip was extremely dangerous, but she could only nod in tears. Dany handed her the evidence he had so that even if he died in Kono, Mattie could expose the whole truth. With Mattie's help, Dany got the weapons, and both were about to part. Through so many hardships, they had developed feelings for each other, but this separation could be forever. Before leaving, she not only took a photo for memory, but took the initiative to give him her phone numbers. After the farewell, both set off to pursue their fates. On the way, Dany and Solomon talked about the details of the diamond. Learning the stone was at least 100 carats, Solomon's steps became lighter, as if the diamond and freedom were right in front of him. But that same night, another accident occurred. As a rebel military vehicle roared past, Solomon glimpsed his son Dia in it. Anxious to find him, he made a noise, and they were nearly hunted down by the rebels. After escaping death, Dany's anger was uncontrollable. He even pulled a knife to threaten Solomon. "If you mess up again, I'll skin you alive." But in Solomon's heart, the diamond was not as precious as his son. Despite the threat, he still wanted to find his son first. They had a conflict and a fierce struggle, but Solomon stood firm, and reluctantly, Dany had to yield. At night, they snuck into the rebel camp but found no trace of Dia. They had to continue their journey. Before they used to talk about diamonds, but now they began to talk about their lives and truly open up. Dany even promised he would rescue Dia. After walking another day and night along small trails, they finally reached the mine where the diamond was buried. But the place was heavily guarded. With no other choice, Dany had to make a dangerous bet by sending the specific coordinates to the colonel, asking him to use heavy fire to clear the way. Dany knew it was risky, but he hoped to take advantage of the battle between both sides to sneak in, dig, and escape. But Solomon felt something was wrong because he was sure his son was inside. At night, while Dany slept, he secretly infiltrated and found his son. Who would have thought the boy not only didn't recognize him, but saw him as a traitor and captured him? Dany, noticing Solomon's absence, also followed, waiting for an opportunity. The next morning, the injured rebel commander appeared. Seeing Solomon, he rejoiced and used an axe to threaten him into handing over the diamond. The commander coveted that stone because, like Dany, he wanted to use the money to escape that hell. Faced with the threat, Solomon was about to give in, while Dany, hidden, was anxious about the diamond being snatched away. Just then, the colonel's helicopter appeared. Under the rain of bullets and bombs, the rebels crumbled. Dany focused on protecting Dia, as it was the only way Solomon would reveal the hiding spot. Despite the danger, he saved Dia. And Solomon found his chance for revenge, using an iron bar to finish off the one-eyed commander. With absolute fire superiority, the rebels were annihilated. At this point, attention returned to Solomon. He knew the location of the diamond was his saving grace, so he kept silent. It wasn't until the colonel said that if Dany managed to make him talk, they would split it 60-40, or else both would die, that Dany brought Dia out. With his weak point threatened again, Solomon had no choice but to yield. The group went to the burial site. The spot had already been excavated by the rebels, but Solomon feigned having found the diamond. Dany took advantage of the chaos to kill a soldier, and Solomon attacked the colonel. Dany hid in the woods and later finished off the colonel. Shortly after, Solomon truly unearthed the diamond, but during the battle, Dany had been hit by a bullet in the abdomen. Unexpectedly, Daya blocked their path with a gun. It wasn't until Solomon used all his emotional appeal that his son regained his senses. However, just as the reunion ended, they were attacked and had to flee. On the way, Dany asked for the diamond back and contacted his accomplice to send a plane to pick them up at the mountaintop. They had to cross 10 kilometers of steep paths. Hearing Dany's gasps, Solomon advised him to rest, but the enemy could catch up at any moment. However, halfway up the slope, Dany had no strength left. Solomon carried him and continued, but shortly after, Dany was completely exhausted. He knew he didn't have much time left, so he pulled out that pale pink stone. It was what he had traded his life for, but he would no longer have the chance to enjoy it. He decided to hand the stone to Solomon. Additionally, he gave him Mattie's card so he could ask her for help upon returning to the capital and handed him a gun, warning him not to trust his accomplice. Just then, the enemy caught up to them. To buy time for Solomon to escape, Dany stayed alone to fight. When he saw that Solomon and his son were far away, he sighed in relief. Then he used a satellite phone to call Mattie, telling her to pick up Solomon at all costs. Receiving the call, Mattie was happy, but hearing the heavy breathing, her heart sank.
I'm looking at an incredible view right now. I wish you were here, Mattie.
Okay, then I'm coming to be with you. You just tell me where you are. Why aren't you bringing it yourself?
I'm saying it's a real story now. You can write the hell out of it.
The accomplice's helicopter flew over Dany, but he no longer felt regret. The landscape here is beautiful. I wish you were here too. Dany told her he was exactly where he was meant to be. After hanging up, he grabbed a handful of blood-soaked earth. As the colonel said, this was his destiny. In the bright sunset, Dany closed his eyes peacefully. Shortly after, Solomon, with Mattie's help, took the pink diamond to London and reached a deal with the diamond monopoly. The condition was to find his family. Solomon's family was finally reunited, and the transaction was recorded by Mattie. Afterward, she exposed the dark secrets of the blood diamond trade. Solomon testified before the world. Finally, in May 2003, 40 countries signed the Kimberley Process. Diamonds are just transparent stones, but human greed has turned them into symbols of power. Although international agreements can curb illegal trade, they cannot reduce avarice. We don't need to boycott a material object, but rather recognize the relationship with ourselves and reconcile our desires and our conscience. Because what is bloody has never been the diamond, but human greed and ever-expanding desires. Today's story ends here. Thank you for watching.